Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 236th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast, and it's International Women's History Month. So this month's series is all about bringing women away from the stereotypes and masks for the Diverse Minds podcast. And speaking of coming forward, have you watched my TEDx talk about the connection between culture, race, and mental health? It's now live. It's something you can watch in your break as it's just 12 minutes long. The link is in the show notes, but I'll also give it to you here. It is bit.ly/TEDx Wolves, WOLVESLO. I hope you enjoy it because it was a labor of love. And if you did, please leave a positive comment on YouTube, share, like, and tell other people about it. Also, don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at Diverse Minds UK. So this Thursday is, of course, International Women's Day, and the UN's theme is Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress. And one of the key challenges in advancing gender equity by 2030 is a lack of financing, with a staggering $360 billion annual deficit in spending on gender equality matters. So as positive as this day or month is, we have to think systemically about change, how the system of patriarchy needs to change so we don't have to keep repeating these stats and having certain slogans to remind people how important it is. Now, there is another theme this year from IWD, internationalwomen'sday.com, which is different, and their theme is inspiring inclusion. And they say, to inspire inclusion means to celebrate diversity and empowerment of International Women's Day 2024 and beyond. The campaign theme, Inspire Inclusion, emphasizes the importance of diversity and empowerment in all aspects of society. And the idea of this year's campaign theme underscores the crucial role of inclusion in achieving gender equality. It calls for action to break down barriers, challenge stereotypes, and create environments where all women are valued and respected. Inspire Inclusion encourages everyone to recognize the unique perspectives and contributions of women from all walks of life, including those from marginalized communities. And the piece goes on, and it is helpful, but great. But the thing is, for their action is they're asking women to make a heart shape with their hands, hold it over their heart to take a photo and share, not just women, everyone. Well, I find that quite interesting because I think there's a problem systemically. We've had one particularly strong stat. How is this going to change? How are people posing with a heart shape over the heart really going to change the status quo? So the principles and ideas are great, but we need to go a lot deeper to shift patriarchal systems. So this is the thing. In order to eliminate things like the gender pay gap, which are not getting narrower. And in fact, we are now talking more helpfully. I think it's important, the pension pay gap, but I think that is going to be very stark. Stop the motherhood penalty and ensure workplaces. There is lots we have to do. So thinking about this idea of systemic change, firstly, these are just three ideas, but we've got ending poverty. So the COVID pandemic, geopolitical conflicts, genocides, war, climate disaster, economic turmoil have pushed an extra 75 million people into severe poverty since 2020. Okay, that's just in the last 4 years. And these have been taken from the UN's Accelerates Women's press statement. So we have to tackle social injustice, understanding the link between poverty and mental health, well-being, and we've got to keep campaigning. So if you want to know more about this, check out episode 177 about poverty and mental health, episode 178 with Jerry C. Perkins, where I talked to her about tackling social injustice, and episode 179, campaigning against poverty to support mental health with Erin Norton-Brown from Mind. Okay, the second thing we can think about systemically, one of the things is moving to a green economy. So the current economic system exacerbates poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation, and it's only getting worse by the day, despite, I have to say, the brilliant job that climate campaigners do, and those of us that are armchair campaigners and sign things and walk where we can and do what we can and recycle. That's all important. Compost, contribute to community gardens. That's really, really important. But I just want to take some time out and say I have so much admiration for climate justice campaigners. So all of these things disproportionately affect women and marginalized groups. So if you want to find out more about how vital climate justice is and how we need to be talking about climate injustice, climate chaos, climate crisis, it does not change anymore. Check out episode 193, firstly, how anxiety is linked to the climate crisis. Episode 194 with Jelly May Maring from Parents for Future, and that's all about how parents can think about climate change and take actions to make sure the world is here for children and grandchildren. One of my favorite episodes of all time that really opened my eyes with Irene Asua, which is Colonial Legacies and Climate Change. Episode 196, How Divestment Links to Mental Health. So I talk about in that episode divesting from toxic organizations. And I, in fact, have just done that myself on a number of bank accounts because there is going to be no change. And episode 206, Making Climate Justice Accessible with Pooja Tilvawala. Okay, and then thirdly, I mean, I could go on. This podcast episode could be like 20 hours, but it's about amplifying the voices of feminist change makers. So feminist organizations are really leading efforts to tackle women's poverty, particularly in the global south, and inequity, but they're pretty much running on empty. And if we think about this country and the precarious situations of rape crisis organizations, sexual violence organizations, period poverty organizations, they receive, globally, they receive a meager 0.13% of total official development assistance. I mean, I would think maybe it would be 3%, 0.13. So learn more about global feminism and how to get involved. And one way you can do that is check out episode 101 with the wonderful Raki Shah, CEO of the Circle NGO, about defining global feminism. So I really hope you're enjoying the content of this podcast and you want to keep up to date. If that's the case, why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? When you join, you'll receive a copy of my ebook, The Mentally Healthy Leading Manager, and that link is bit.ly/MHLMEBK21. Okay, so now I'm going to delve a little bit into giving an overview of some of the ideas that we can have around shifting the status quo and thinking about really embedding this idea of gender equity in 3 areas. But let's delve deeper into this idea of systemic change. So much like the social model of disability, where you have it's not the person that is the issue, it is how do we change systems or create accessible environments. This is very similar. So systemic change is not about women not fitting in, but it's about the social system being deficient, and the fact that often efforts that are made are very glossy. They're often sponsored by corporates. They don't go deep enough. They don't really give the power where the power needs to be. So systemic change needs to address and improve social and cultural systems, learning, work environments, structures, power dynamics that have been detrimental to women in all walks of life, in the workplace, outside of the workplace. Finances is a big one, etc., as well as thinking about the fact that people are complex. So we're not just one thing. We're not just our gender. We are much more than that. So an example is, in corporations and many organizations, there might be a women's network. Absolutely. It's really important to have that. It's really important to have a safe space. But one organization I did some interim work for, they had a women's network and it was invite only. And it was only for senior women. Now, in this particular organization, as is the case in many organizations, most of the senior women, I think all of the senior women, and there were only about, I don't know, maybe 40 of them, were white and from particular backgrounds. They'd all been to university. Again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it becomes very samey. And what then happened to those, what were those conversations? Where did they go? What about change? And it was all very samey, and it was very much of a secret squirrel club. One of the things I feel really strongly about is if we think about cleaning staff, maintenance staff, facilities staff, where is the space for women who work in those roles to be included in this? So this is the thing. So then companies say, oh, we've got women's network. Isn't that great? But who's actually included in that women's network? Are you talking about systemic change? And if you are, where can those recommendations go? Who is going to listen and act on them? So what's the change? What's the responsibility? How can there really be a power shift? So thinking, building on that, inspiring inclusion, this little heart shape, actually it's so much more than that, because feminist practice looks at these power imbalances that are present in all systems and institutions. And the idea is to decenter that power, much like with race equity work, much like with, if we think about ableist perspectives, really getting that social model of disability in there. So the dominant power structures situates experts as superiors to recipients. What feminist practice does, it rejects this kind of normative dynamic and understands that marginalized communities are not passive recipients, but they are agents of change and have agentic facilities of their own, so they can make that change. So really it has to be these constant conversations about power, decentering dominant frameworks, expertise, and narratives. And this is across all cultures. And how, again, as I say, with so many things, feeling the discomfort. So how Can there be critical reflection? And even before that, what's the assumption of how the system is created? So the last series on white dominant norms, you could apply some of those principles to this as well. How does the dominant narrative, what is it? Can you unpick that? Why is that the case? Who does it actually help? And how can that be changed? So then to apply a recentering, listening to opinions and listening to the broad variety of women that are in the workplace or space, community group, you could apply this to anything, and trying to recenter that and think about those lived experiences and change the way that things have been done. And it has to be very intentional. So as part of that process, it is about shifting resources, shifting decision-making, which can be very difficult, and taking account a real perspective, 360 perspective view, and knowing, again, as always, that you can't just do it overnight. So I don't think anyone's solved it, but in essence, yes, we need to celebrate International Women's Day, International Women's Month, but as with Black History Month, it is all about a 365 approach. It's lifelong, it's ongoing work. Investing in women is human rights imperative and a cornerstone for building inclusive society. We know that progress for women will benefit everyone, more than 50% of the population. How could it not? And if this is a topic you'd like me to talk about, don't forget that I am a professional speaker and I'm more than happy to support your events. This could be delivering a keynote talk, a TED-style talk, be part of a panel, fireside chat, training, or leadership sessions. And some of the topics I talk about are why we need to stop talking about imposter syndrome. You'll know that I find that I have a lot of opinions on that, and do check out my podcast episode, Imposter Syndrome versus Frustration Syndrome. Standing in your confidence, women, one size does not fit all, about the intersectional experience of women, and why you need to stop stereotyping South Asian women. And don't forget, I've delivered talks at International Women's Day events at the Royal Veterinary College, University of Sheffield, and Peerage College London, the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce, and more. I really hope you've enjoyed the show. And if so, why not write me a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from? I'd love to know what you're doing for International Women's Week. And as always, you can send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. And I've also included in the references a PDF from Women Gender Equality Canada, NCWIT's Systemic Change Models, and a really great Medium article about systems for change and what is feminist change systems. So I'll see you in the next episode, where I'm talking to the wonderful Marie Loney about unmasking the mask, what's behind beauty and women. So until then, everyone, take care and have a great International Women's Day.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.